My name is Clara, and I grew up in a house where my name might as well have been not Vivian. From as far back as I can remember, my mother's eyes lit up only when my sister walked into the room. Vivian was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. She could spill juice on the carpet, and it became a funny little accident. I could get straight A's, and it was good, but maybe next time you'll be as polished as your sister. It wasn't just favoritism. It was an art form in our household. My mother had perfected it, the way she'd gush over Vivian's new hairstyle while glancing at mine like I'd run headfirst into a hedge. The way my father would beam when Vivian played piano, nodding along as if she were Beethoven reincarnated, then yawn 5 minutes into my book reports. The unspoken rule was that Vivian deserved more because she was gifted. That word was thrown around like a family heirloom. She was gifted in music, in charm, in carrying herself like a lady. I was, apparently, gifted in being forgettable. When I was 15, the gap between us became more than just emotional. It became material. Vivian got a brand new wardrobe every season, dresses, shoes, even custom handbags, because she has to look the part if she's going to be a performer one day. I got hand-me-downs from her that smelled faintly of her perfume and came with tiny flaws she swore she didn't notice until now. I started working after school at a small bookstore 2 streets over. It was a dusty, cozy place where the air always smelled like paper and coffee. My boss, Mrs. Fletcher, was kind enough to let me do my homework behind the counter if the shop was quiet. The pay was small, just enough for snacks, second-hand clothes, and the occasional notebook I didn't have to share with Vivian. Vivian never had to work. She was too busy with rehearsals and creative exploration. My parents clung to the idea that she was destined for greatness, and greatness apparently needed funding. So while I rang up books for customers who barely glanced at me, Vivian was at home taking piano lessons from a teacher who cost more per hour than I earned in a week. What kept our family financially afloat wasn't my parents' jobs. They hadn't had stable work in years. The real lifeline was my mother's older brother, Uncle Samuel. He lived across the country, had a comfortable retirement, and no children of his own. Every few months, he sent money for the girls, along with long, thoughtful letters. He never missed a holiday or a birthday, even if it was just a card. Back then, I didn't realize how much of a lifeline he truly was for them and later for me. All I knew was that whenever his name came up, my parents' tone shifted, a little too bright, a little too eager. I didn't know it yet, but Uncle Samuel was about to change everything. If you want, I can continue with part 2 right away, and keep building the tension step by step until all 10 parts are done. Do you want me to proceed directly to part 2 now? You said, okay, ChatGPT said, all right, here's part 2 of 10, about 500 words, continuing right from where we left off. Part 2, the piano that wasn't mine. Uncle Samuel had always been this almost mythical figure in my life, the relative who swooped in for a few days every other year, filling the house with stories and laughter, then vanished back to his quiet home by the coast. When he visited, things felt different. My parents acted polite, Vivian pretended to be humble, and I got to feel, just for a moment, like we were a normal family. But as his health started to decline, his trips became rare. By the time I was 17, I hadn't seen him in over 2 years. Our connection was reduced to the occasional phone call, and even those usually got intercepted by my parents before they ever reached me. I never questioned why they always said, "We'll pass along your message, Samuel," instead of handing me the phone. It was during that year, my final one of high school, that the gift appeared. Vivian came home one afternoon practically glowing, followed by a delivery crew wheeling in a gleaming white upright piano with gold pedals and a matching bench. It was the kind of thing you see in music showrooms, the kind you'd expect in a recording studio, not in our modest living room. I stood in the doorway, watching them set it up. "Where did this come from?" I asked. "From a family friend," my mother replied without looking at me. She was too busy directing the movers on where to place the instrument. Vivian beamed. "Isn't it gorgeous?" "They said it's just what I need to take my playing to the next level." I didn't ask who they were. I didn't ask why our supposed family friend hadn't thought to get me anything for finishing top of my class that semester. I told myself it didn't matter. I wasn't the one who played piano. Still, something about it gnawed at me. The piano had a small brass plate inside the lid. From where I stood, I could make out the engraving, but before I could lean closer, my mother shut the lid with a sharp snap. "You'll smudge it," she told Vivian. I shrugged it off, buried myself in shifts at the bookstore, and avoided the sound of scales and arpeggios filling the house every evening. Vivian loved to practice, with the windows open so the neighbors could hear. My parents loved to linger in the doorway, nodding along like she was already playing at Carnegie Hall. That summer, the distance between me and the rest of my family felt like a canyon. They had their shared dream, Vivian's bright future, and I had my quiet little corner, my worn paperbacks, and my paychecks that vanished almost as soon as they landed in my hands. It never occurred to me that the piano was the first piece of a much bigger betrayal. But the truth was sitting right there in our living room, gleaming under the afternoon light, and I didn't yet know it had been meant for me all along. Do you want me to go straight into part 3, the birthday that changed everything? That's where the tension starts to rise. You said, PK ChatGPT said, all right, here's part 3 of 10, about 500 words. Part 3, the birthday that changed everything. My 19th birthday wasn't supposed to be special. For as long as I could remember, birthdays in our house were muted affairs for me, a store cake if I was lucky, a half-hearted, happy birthday, and maybe a token gift if my parents remembered. Vivian's birthdays, on the other hand, were practically festivals. That year, I was ready for the usual, a quiet evening, maybe a shift at the bookstore, and a few minutes pretending to enjoy a supermarket cake. But in the early afternoon, my phone rang. The name on the screen stopped me cold. Uncle Samuel. Clara, my dear. His voice boomed with warmth. I'm in town. Thought I'd surprise you for your big day. How about dinner? Somewhere nice. Bring your parents and Vivian too. Family should celebrate together. It had been over 3 years since I'd seen him. My chest ached in the best way at the thought of a proper birthday dinner with someone who actually cared. Of course, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. When I told my mother, her smile looked wrong. Too tight. That's lovely, she said, as if she were trying to process an unexpected plot twist. My father grunted something about checking his schedule. Vivian just rolled her eyes and asked, do we have to? By 7, we were all in a cab headed to a restaurant I'd only ever seen from the outside, the kind with velvet chairs, white tablecloths, and waiters who glide instead of walk. Uncle Samuel was already at the table, looking thinner than I remembered, but still exuding that effortless presence that made you want to sit up straighter. He greeted each of us warmly, though I noticed he hugged me longer. Over the course of the meal, he asked me about everything, my job, my plans for the future, even what books I'd been reading lately. My parents barely engaged. Vivian spent half the time scrolling on her phone under the table. Dessert arrived, and just as I was thinking the evening couldn't get better, Uncle Samuel leaned toward me and asked, So, Clara, did you enjoy the piano? I blinked. What piano? He frowned slightly. The one I sent you last year. White upright, gold pedals. You didn't get it. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My fork hovered over my plate. Vivian got one like that, I said slowly. Mum said it was from a family friend. Samuel set down his glass. His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. It was from me, Clara. For you. The table went silent. My mother's knuckles whitened around her napkin. My father avoided eye contact. Vivian's face flushed, and she muttered something under her breath. In that moment, I realized the shiny piano in our living room wasn't just an indulgence for my sister. It was mine, stolen before it ever touched my hands. And Uncle Samuel wasn't about to let it slide. Do you want me to continue with part 4, confrontation at the table, where things explode? That's where the scene gets intense. You said, okay, ChatGPT said, here's part 4 of 10, about 500 words. Part 4, confrontation at the table. For a moment, no one spoke. The clink of silverware and low murmur of other diners seemed far away, like I was underwater. Uncle Samuel's gaze moved slowly from me to my parents, his expression unreadable, but heavy enough to make my stomach twist. Margaret, he said finally, his voice calm, but with an edge sharp enough to cut glass. Why is Vivian in possession of the piano I bought for Clara? My mother's lips tightened. Samuel, there must be some misunderstanding. He raised one eyebrow. A misunderstanding. I ordered that piano myself, had it engraved with Clara's name on the inside panel. Paid extra to have it delivered directly to your house. He turned back to me. Did you see any engraving? I shook my head. No. I barely got near it. Mum shut the lid when I tried. The color drained from my mother's face. My father finally spoke, his tone defensive. Look, the piano was impractical for Clara. She doesn't even play. Vivian needed it for her music. Needed it. Samuel's voice rose, and a few heads turned from nearby tables. I didn't ask who needed it. I gave it to Clara. I also sent money, for her lessons, for her opportunities. Where is that money, Jamie? My father shifted in his seat. We used it for the good of the family. I almost laughed. The good of the family apparently meant Vivian's lessons, Vivian's clothes, Vivian's everything. And did the good of the family include telling Clara that a cheap supermarket cake was from me? Samuel pressed. Vivian muttered, "This is ridiculous," but her voice wavered. Samuel leaned forward, his eyes fixed on my parents. You've been taking what I sent for Clara and giving it to Vivian for years, haven't you? My mother glanced at my father, then back at Samuel. We did what was best. Clara's independent. She doesn't need as much. Something in me snapped. Independent. You mean ignored. You mean left out. You mean treated like I don't matter unless you can use me as an excuse to get more from Uncle Samuel. My voice shook, but it was loud enough that the table next to us went completely silent. Samuel sat back, his decision clear in his face before he even spoke. This ends tonight. Not another cent. You've stolen from me, and worse, you've stolen from her. My mother's lips parted, but Samuel held up a hand. No. We're done. Clara, you're coming with me. We'll talk in the car. He threw a few bills on the table, enough to cover our meals, and stood. I followed, my legs trembling, every eye in the restaurant on us. My parents stayed frozen in their seats. Vivian stared at her lap. By the time we stepped out into the cool night air, my pulse was still hammering. I'd known for years I wasn't their favorite. I just hadn't realized they'd been actively stealing my future. And I was about to find out just how much they'd taken. Do you want me to go straight into part 5, the full truth? That's where Samuel reveals everything they'd been hiding. You said, "Okay, ChatGPT said, here's part 5 of 10, about 500 words." Part 5, the full truth. We walked to his car in silence, the click of his cane against the pavement steady and deliberate. My head was buzzing, my chest tight. I'd always suspected my parents favored Vivian, but I'd never imagined they were actively rerouting things meant for me. When we were both inside the car, Samuel sat for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, like he was weighing whether to speak. Then he turned to me. "Clara," he said, his tone softer now, "I need you to know this wasn't just about the piano." I looked at him, bracing myself. "For years," he continued, "I've been sending money, directly to your parents, with instructions that it was for your education, your hobbies, whatever would help you build the life you deserve. Every holiday, every birthday, there was something. Not just the piano. I paid for a summer writing program you never attended, art supplies you never received, even an online course in languages that I thought you'd enjoy. And every time I asked your parents how it went, they had an excuse. I felt sick. They never told me about any of that." "I see that now," he said, jaw tight. "At first, I thought maybe you weren't interested, but it didn't sit right. Tonight confirmed what I've suspected for a while. They've been pocketing every bit of it for themselves and for Vivian. The trips, the clothes, the lessons, all of it bought with money I sent for you." I leaned back against the seat, trying to process. Images flashed in my mind. Vivian showing off a new dress, my parents bragging about her talent, the smugness whenever they said they found a way to afford something. They told me there was never enough for me to do anything extra, I whispered. Samuel's expression hardened. They lied. They made sure you stayed in the shadows so they could pour everything into her. That ends now. I swallowed hard. What are you saying? I'm saying, he said firmly, you're not going back there. You'll come with me. I have a place by the coast, quiet, safe, and full of opportunity. You can study, work, play that piano without someone slamming the lid on you. I'll help you start fresh. It felt impossible, like something out of a dream. You mean, leave tonight? Yes. I can help you pack what's important. The rest doesn't matter. You don't owe them a single thing after what they've done. For a long moment, I just stared out the window at the blurred city lights. I thought about all the years of being ignored, the backhanded comments, the celebrations I wasn't invited to. I thought about the brass plate inside the piano, my name, hidden under Vivian's fingers. Okay, I said finally, my voice steady. Let's go. Samuel smiled faintly, started the engine, and pulled into the street. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was heading somewhere that was mine. Do you want me to continue with part 6, leaving it all behind next? That's where Clara actually packs up and leaves home. You said, okay, 2 halves, ChatGPT said. Here's part 6 of 10, about 500 words. Part 6, leaving it all behind. The drive back to my parents' house felt longer than usual. I sat in silence, my mind replaying every moment of the dinner, every detail of Samuel's confession. By the time we pulled into the driveway, my decision was solid. I wasn't staying here another night. Samuel parked at the curb and turned to me. Go in, get what matters. We'll load it in the car and be gone in 15 minutes. The rest, they can keep. The front door creaked as I stepped inside. My parents were in the living room, voices low but heated. Vivian was upstairs, the faint sound of piano keys drifting down, that stolen piano. My mother looked up first. Clara, what is this? Leaving with Samuel like some dramatic. I'm not here to argue, I said flatly. I'm here to get my things. My father stood, face dark. Don't be ridiculous. You live here. You can't just, I can, I cut in. And I will. You made sure I was never part of this family unless you could use me. I'm done. My mother's jaw tightened, but she didn't move to stop me. I walked past them, up the stairs to my small, box-like room. It didn't take long to pack. A duffel for clothes. A backpack for my journals, the few books I'd bought myself, and a framed photo of me and Samuel from when I was 12, the last summer he visited before his health declined. As I zipped the bag, Vivian appeared in the doorway. You're seriously leaving? Over a piano. Her voice had that airy, mocking tone she used whenever she wanted to belittle me. It's not just the piano, I said, shoving the last of my things inside. It's everything. She smirked. Good luck, then. You'll come crawling back when you realize how hard life is without them. I stared at her for a long second. Life's already been hard, Vivian. The only difference now is it'll be mine to live. She rolled her eyes and left. Back downstairs, Samuel was waiting by the door. I carried my bags out, ignoring my parents' glares. My father muttered something about burning bridges, but I didn't answer. As Samuel placed my things in the trunk, my mother called after me. Clara. Don't forget, we're still your family. I turned back just enough to meet her gaze. You only remember that when you want something. Samuel closed the trunk. Let's go. We got in the car, and as we pulled away, I didn't look back. The house shrank in the rearview mirror, the piano's distant notes fading until there was only silence. That night, as we drove through the sleeping city toward the coast, I felt lighter than I ever had, like I'd finally stepped out from under a shadow I'd been living in my whole life. Do you want me to move on to part 7, A New Home, by the Coast next, where Clara sees Samuel's world for the first time? You said, "Okay, ChatGPT said. Here's part 7 of 10, about 500 words. Part 7, A New Home, by the Coast." The highway stretched ahead, dark and quiet except for the hum of the engine. Samuel didn't talk much on the drive, and I was grateful. I needed the silence to keep from falling apart. Every so often, I'd glance at him, his eyes fixed on the road, his posture steady. It struck me that this was the first time in years I'd been in a car with an adult who made me feel safe. By the time we reached the coast, the sky was just beginning to pale. The air changed first, that faint tang of salt and seaweed drifting in through the cracked window. I rolled it down and let the wind hit my face, breathing in air that felt clean in a way the city never did. Samuel's house appeared at the end of a quiet lane, half hidden behind tall cypress trees. It was nothing like my parents' cramped, bay suburban place. 2 stories, weathered wood siding painted a deep slate blue, wide porch, and the low, constant hush of the ocean somewhere beyond. He parked out front and looked at me. "Welcome home, Clara." Inside, the house felt like a lived-in library. Shelves lined the walls, crammed with books and little mementos from Samuel's travels. A fireplace with a stone hearth sat in the middle of the living room, and on the far side, near the bay windows, stood a grand piano, black, gleaming, clearly well-loved. "You can play that one," Samuel said with a half-smile. "No one's going to take it from you." I walked over and ran my fingers along the keys. The sound was warm, rich, even though I could barely play, it felt like something mine. Upstairs, my room was ready. He'd set it up years ago, he told me, in case I ever visited longer than a weekend. The bed was covered in a quilt that smelled faintly of lavender. The window opened to a view of the ocean, the waves stretching out to meet the pale sky. I set my bags down and just stood there, staring. It didn't feel real, that I could close the door and know no one would barge in, that I could breathe without measuring every word and movement. Over breakfast, eggs, toast, and coffee strong enough to make me blink, Samuel laid out his plan. "You'll have time to figure out what you want. I can help you apply for classes, find work here, maybe start with lessons for that piano if you're interested. The important thing is, you're safe now. No one's going to decide your life for you." The words landed deep. Safe. Mine. Deciding my own life. I hadn't realized how starved I was for that until he said it. As the day unfolded, I explored the house, unpacked my things, and let the steady rhythm of the ocean become part of the background. That night, lying in a bed that was mine in a place where I belonged, I realized this wasn't just escape. It was the beginning of something new. Do you want me to go on to part 8, Unpacking the Past, where Clara begins to process everything that happened? You said, "Okay, ChatGPT said. Here's part 8 of 10, about 500 words." Part 8, Unpacking the Past. The next morning, I woke to the sound of gulls calling over the surf. For the first few seconds, I forgot where I was. Then the smell of coffee drifting up the stairs reminded me I wasn't in my cramped, shadowed bedroom anymore. I was in Samuel's house, by the sea. Free. But freedom came with its own weight. Over breakfast, I found myself picking at toast, my mind replaying last night's escape like a loop I couldn't stop. The confrontation, my parents' faces, Vivian's smirk, each memory carried a mix of anger and disbelief. Samuel noticed. "You're quiet," he said gently. "I keep thinking about everything," I admitted. "It's like I'm finally seeing it all clearly, but it still doesn't make sense. How do parents do that to their kid?" He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Sometimes, people convince themselves that what they are doing is justified. Other times, they just don't care enough to question it. Either way, it's not on you to carry their reasons." I nodded, but the knot in my stomach stayed. After breakfast, I went upstairs and opened the smaller of my 2 bags, the one with my journals. Years of my handwriting stared back at me, messy and cramped, page after page filled with thoughts I'd never dared speak aloud. I sat on the floor and began to read. There it was in ink, all the small humiliations I'd brushed off at the time. My 16th birthday, when they forgot to invite any of my friends, but threw a huge party for Vivian 2 weeks later. The summer I wanted to join a writing camp, but was told it was too expensive, only to watch Vivian attend a music program abroad. The dozens of times I told myself not to make a fuss, because that would just make me seem ungrateful. The words felt like evidence. Proof that I hadn't imagined it, that I hadn't been overly sensitive. They really had treated me like I mattered less. Around noon, Samuel knocked on the door. "I'm going into town. Want to come?" We drove along the coast to a little cafe where the owner greeted Samuel like an old friend. Over lunch, he asked about the journals, and I told him. He didn't offer pity, just listened, really listened, which somehow made it easier to keep talking. "You've been keeping track of your truth," he said finally. "That's more than most people can say. Now you can decide what to do with it, whether to leave it in the past or use it to build something." The idea stayed with me for the rest of the day. That evening, I sat at the piano by the bay window. My fingers stumbled over the keys, but each note felt like a declaration. I was here, and I wasn't going back. I wasn't just unpacking my bags. I was unpacking my life. Do you want me to continue with Part 9, Building a Future, where Clara starts actively shaping her new life? You said, "Okay," ChatGPT said. "Here's Part 9 of 10, about 500 words." Part 9, Building a Future. The following weeks passed in a rhythm that felt completely foreign to me, slow, steady, and mine to set. Mornings began with coffee and the sound of waves through the open kitchen window. Afternoons were for whatever I chose, walking along the shore, getting lost in Samuel's shelves of books, or sitting at the piano and practicing clumsy scales until they started to sound less clumsy. Samuel gave me space, but was always nearby if I needed him. Sometimes we'd talk about nothing, a news headline, a neighbor's cat that kept showing up on the porch, and sometimes we'd talk about bigger things, like what I wanted to do with my life. At first, I didn't have an answer. Years of being told no had made it hard to imagine saying yes to anything. But slowly, possibilities started to form. I found an ad for a creative writing class at the local community center and signed up. I also started helping out at the cafe we'd visited on my first full day here, just a few hours a week, clearing tables and learning how to make the perfect cappuccino. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. One afternoon, Samuel surprised me by handing over a small stack of envelopes. "These are for you," he said. They were letters, actual handwritten letters, from people I hadn't heard from in years. Cousins, old friends from school, even a teacher who'd once encouraged my writing. Samuel had quietly reached out to them, letting them know where I was and that they could contact me directly. Reading through them was bittersweet. Some apologized for losing touch, saying my parents had made it hard to stay connected. Others simply said they were glad to know I was okay. For the first time, I realized just how much my world had been controlled, not just my opportunities, but my connections. I kept the letters in a small wooden box on my desk. They felt like seeds, reminders that there were still people who saw me. By the end of the month, I'd started filling a notebook with plans, things I wanted to try, skills I wanted to learn, places I wanted to visit. Some were small, bake bread from scratch, take a photography walk at sunrise. Others were big, publish a short story, travel to another country. One evening, Samuel found me at the piano, working through a simple song. "You've been busy," he said, nodding toward the open notebook. "Yeah," I smiled. "Guess I'm finally figuring out what my life could look like." He rested a hand on my shoulder. "That's the thing about the future, Clara. It's a lot bigger when you realize it's yours." For the first time in as long as I could remember, I believed him. Do you want me to go straight into Part 10, the choice to confront, where Clara decides whether to face her parents again or leave the past behind? You said, "Okay," ChatGPT said. "Here's Part 10 of 10, about 500 words." Part 10, the choice to confront. It had been nearly 2 months since I left my parents' house. The air by the coast had shifted from warm to crisp, mornings wrapped in a mist that made the ocean look endless. I'd fallen into a life I didn't know I was allowed to have, one built from quiet mornings, small victories, and the growing certainty that I'd never go back to who I was before. And then the letter came. It was addressed in my mother's handwriting, the same looping script that used to sign my permission slips. My first instinct was to throw it away, but curiosity, or maybe a need for finality, made me open it. Clara, we don't understand why you left the way you did. Things have been tense since, and Vivian is upset. We hope you'll come for dinner soon so we can talk this through. Family is too important to throw away over misunderstandings. Mom, misunderstandings. The word burned. I showed the letter to Samuel. He read it once, twice, and then placed it on the table. So, he said, what do you want to do? The question was simple, but the answer wasn't. Part of me wanted to march back into that house and lay everything out, the lies, the money, the years of being sidelined. I wanted them to admit it. I wanted them to feel the weight of it. But another part of me, the parts that had been growing stronger here, wondered what good it would do. Samuel's words from weeks ago echoed in my mind. It's not on you to carry their reasons. I took the day to think. I walked along the shore until the tide came in, letting the waves soak my shoes. I thought about my journals, my new notebook of plans, the piano waiting by the bay window. I thought about how much energy I'd already given to people who never gave it back. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter in return. Mom, I left because staying meant losing myself completely. You might call it a misunderstanding, but I know the truth. I'm building a life where I'm respected and seen, something I didn't have there. I'm not coming to dinner. Not now. Maybe not ever. Clara, I sealed it, addressed it, and set it by the door for the morning mail. Then I sat at the piano. The song I played was still simple, but it had weight now. Each note was a choice, to stay here, to move forward, to protect what I'd started. The ocean whispered through the window, steady and endless. For the first time, I understood that not all confrontations happen face to face. Sometimes, the real confrontation is in choosing yourself and refusing to step back into a life that tried to erase you. And that's a choice I knew I'd keep making, every day from here on.